Hello and welcome to HealthTech Hour on UK Health Radio. My name is Steve Roest, and each week I bring you the best news, views and interviews with the entrepreneurs and leaders driving the health tech revolution in the UK and beyond. I am a CEO and founder of a health tech company myself, and I'm passionate about the people and companies who are changing the world. Before I introduce this week's guest, please make sure you follow us on the socials. It's at HealthTech Hour, and make sure you follow at UK Health Radio as well to stay on top of all of the great guests that we have on the station. So as regular listeners will know, this show is really all about the people and companies who are changing the world in their own area of health tech. We had a huge response last week when we had Max Kirsting on from Regimen, who was talking about how erectile dysfunction can mask a huge host of other way more serious issues within men's health, and how they are using digital solutions to address that. We also had a huge response to the show with Catherine Falkend, who's using digital platform to revolutionize the care pathway for sufferers of polycystic ovary syndrome. So each of these people and companies are developing their own revolutionary health tech, but it's really focused in one area, their area. But today's guest, Neelam Patel, is in the unique position of running an organization whose literal central mission is to change the world across the board and advance health tech, support entrepreneurs and clinicians to accelerate their pace of development so that basically the future gets here quicker. The organization is called MedCity, and is probably one of the most important organizations in the UK health tech industry at the moment. And Neelam Patel is CEO, which makes her, by definition, one of the most influential people in UK health tech right now. So Neelam, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm really well, thank you, Steve, and thank you for that brilliant introduction, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh, no problem. Look, we try, this show is all about showcasing people that are doing amazing things. So it's really the least that we could do. How are things going for you and MedCity during the pandemic? What's the mood in the camp?
Well, what can I say? I mean, the team have been brilliant, actually. It's probably coming up to a year now where we've not been office based.
Yeah,
And
crazy.
it's tough. And we've got a very small team, actually, and a number of them are younger than I am, I have to say, and do like, being social and having face-to-face interaction with other team members and also our clients. I mean, I'm at an age where I can probably balance both. So, I mean, credit to them, the fact that they've, been able to manage in a home environment and still be productive and do loads of great things. So, yeah, I mean, we're doing as well as everybody else, I think, in this situation.
Good. Well, that's good to hear. So as regular listeners will know, this show takes three parts, or it consists of three parts. The first part is really more of an origin, so how you came to be doing what you're doing today. The middle part is really what you're doing right now to change the world, which I know, having done our pre-production call, is pretty significant. And there's a lot of really exciting stuff that we're going to talk about. And then the final part is around how and what will the future hold. And we can kick around some issues of the day, potentially trying to stay off of COVID if we can, but it's one of those things that generally comes up in most conversations at the moment. So to kick off, let's talk about, how did you get started in health tech?
So it's an interesting question, and I'm sure, like many of your previous guests, it probably wasn't a well-crafted sort of journey. It certainly wasn't, in my view, my sort of start. And I guess I ended up doing a degree in biomedical sciences, actually, which is very broad, and largely that was because my father pushed me into doing science. I was very happy to do actually art and needlework. I really loved it, and biology, and he sort of convinced me that actually you're probably not going to get the job you want by doing art and needlework.
Okay.
And so I ended up in a quite a broad science space, but I sort of knew at that point in time that I was quite interested in technology. I'd actually done an O-level in computer science and learned how to code in BBC Basic, so that gives some clues as to how old I am.
All right, yeah, that's a bit of a clue.
And I was the proud owner of an Amstrad word processor at university, so
yeah,
that gives you another clue.
Right.
But I guess my sort of real interest started in well, health tech, I guess, is when I joined the pharmaceutical industry, and health tech. Well, health tech wasn't really known in the pharmaceutical industry at that time,
Right.
in a sense. I was really fortunate in having many roles actually within the industry at the time. And when I joined, actually, it was the era of the blockbuster. So
Okay.
I was involved in quite a number of pharmaceutical medicines that changed people's lives quite dramatically. I mean, one of my areas was the development of ondansetron, and which is known as Zofran, which is an
Sovereign.
antiemetic, and it's
Okay.
indicated for people with chemotherapy or on
Wow.
chemotherapy. So,
And
I
that
mean,
was a blockbuster in its own right.
yes, indeed. I mean, and that was the first of its class. I mean, as many people know, if you're a cancer patient, you're undergoing chemotherapy, one of the biggest put-offs is the feeling of nausea. So this actually, dramatically changed people's tolerance to chemotherapy. Um, so I sort of, did quite a number of roles, as I said, and I think in the pharmaceutical industry, there are a couple of things that stuck in my mind, actually. One was the fact that when I was in clinical operations, I was a part of a group that worked with Disney, actually, which is quite
Okay.
interesting when you're in a pharmaceutical company. And
Disney.
yes, why you may ask, and that was because it was really important in the industry to understand, disease from the shoes of a patient, and
Okay.
who better to know about, well, not patients necessarily, but customers, and offering a fantastic customer experience than Disney. And so
Right.
we try to translate some of that into the patient experience, and to
Okay.
understand what they were going through in their sort of
Can
treatment journey.
can you give any examples of stuff that made the cut? So what actually got implemented in a patient journey that you sort of gleaned from those meetings with Disney? That'd be super interesting.
Yeah, I think so. So I mean, for example, at the time I was working in clinical trials, and for those people that have worked in clinical trials, actually getting patients interested in participating in a trial is hard.
Right.
But then actually keeping them in a trial is hard also.
Right.
And
And just to kind of explain to people listening, in case you're not familiar with clinical trials, this is about testing new drugs,
indeed, yes, and
basically.
in fact, more than new drugs, because even digital technologies need to go through trials to make sure that they're safe and effective.
Yep.
So, I mean, the Disney experience really taught us that even helping a patient getting a space in a car park so that they can visit and participate in a clinical trial at a hospital is important to them. That's
Right.
part of the experience, because the worst thing you do is a patient who is coming in for a treatment that's on trial, they can't even find a parking space, or they can't
Right.
even, get comfortable in the waiting area. And so all of those little things help
And
in supporting patients.
and how important is it to ensure that people don't drop out of a trial? Sounds like a simple question, but sort of, I think it might be one of the things that people don't necessarily think about. Like, people go into trials, but actually, how important is it that that cohort or some minimum cohort finish the trial?
Well, it's hugely important, and I think it's important for a number of reasons. One is that the company's invested a lot of money in developing the treatment, and in order to get statistically the right number of patients to actually infer the right outcome and the right conclusion, it's important that all the recruited patients continue wherever possible. So
And the
yes.
and the idea that somebody might drop out of a clinical trial because they couldn't find a parking space is kind of, that's, yeah, I mean, that seems a bit crazy, doesn't it? But I could see it happening.
Yeah, totally, actually. So that was the Disney experience, and then the other experience also that falls on health tech is I was really fortunate to be involved in a very early program of work with the European Innovative Medicines Initiative, which was called Electronic Health Records for Clinical Research. Now, this was a number of years ago, and the ambition was, how can patient health records be used to speed up research and development and to get better outcomes for patients. And this was a European-wide project with an alliance of industry, academia, as well as hospitals. And I mean, for me, it was just a hugely challenging project because the way that patient records are stored in hospitals are so different. How can you even create platforms to do that? And then how can you actually use that information to translate into research? So that was the start of data, health data for me.
Okay.
Which was important. And then another experience I had was around the NIHR and working with the National Institute of Health Research. So you'll see a common thread here around research.
Yeah, I know. I'm reading your CV and your bio and talking about it last week. There's definitely a thread where it's trying to help facilitate people to develop things by you know, whether that be trials or any other methodology.
Totally, yeah. And I think for me, NIHR enabled me to bring industry experience into the NHS and research environment.
So, sorry, go on.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, just for everyone listening, maybe it would be super helpful if you could just explain what the NIHR is and why it matters. I know why it matters, and I think anyone with any kind of sort of, you know, medical company of any kind will know what it is. But what is it and why does it matter?
So I love that statement of yours. So what is it? The National Institute of Health Research is really the research arm of the NHS. So it's centrally funded by the government to enable research, clinical research to be done in the clinical environment. And this can be research that's sponsored by industry, and it can be research that's sponsored by academia and charities. And it's important, it matters because this is the way that we start to innovate and bring new treatments to patients fundamentally.
Yeah. And it's effectively, my understanding was that we've interacted with it to secure our own clinical trial protocol for PocDoc. And my understanding of it is really that it among other things, it sort of lays down the gold standard for clinical trials, you know, evidence generation for, you know, anything within medtech, healthcare, whether it comes from a university, whether it comes from private enterprise, whether it comes from the NHS. Is that correct as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And it'd be interesting to hear your experience of how you found navigating the NIHR, because the NIHR, like the NHS, consists of multiple organizations, and some of them are dedicated to medtech development, others, you know, topic specific, or other pharmaceuticals. And yes, they work very closely with agencies to provide gold standards in how to conduct clinical research, and also how to provide infrastructure. Actually, they provide infrastructure staff as well to conduct those studies. So yes. Okay.
Presumably they were heavily involved, or have been heavily involved, in the COVID vaccine side of things, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, in terms of the vaccine trials, in terms of evaluating the new technologies such as lateral flow tests.
Okay.
So absolutely, very well embedded into the clinical systems.
Okay, I want to just jump back to something that you said about your time in pharma, and then we'll come back again to the NIHR. So you said that when you were in pharma, it was all about the blockbuster drug, and the blockbuster drug is sort of like, you know, Viagra or whatever it is. Viagra is a very common one that people throw around, which is suddenly someone invents something that just explodes worldwide. But at what point, or was it already happening when you were there, that people started to kind of, or pharma started to look beyond drugs into other areas of health tech? When did you start to notice that was happening?
So it was starting to happen, and actually some of it was prompted by the challenges in internalizing research and development. So you know, at the time I started, very much R&D was within the walls of the actual company. There was little sort of collaboration that was done. And through different factors, that started to change, and actually the value of bringing different collaborations to the table became very apparent, actually,
Okay.
and the need to diversify. So that absolutely then led to more interest in health tech, particularly diagnostics. And also then looking at, for example, and this is your area in a sense, for example, a patient with diabetes, sometimes it's not enough for the patient just to have the treatment for diabetes, but they may also need nutritional aids, information sources. They may need reminders as to when to take their medication. Those sorts of companion sort of interventions are needed. And then, of course, you need, the emphasis of early diagnosis also is hugely important. So the industry sort of did start to morph definitely into what we know today, which is a very different sort of field, and which is why MedCity is quite exciting, actually, because it encompasses some of those changes.
You're at the heart of it all. You're the beating heart of health tech in the UK. That's the way I like to think about it. So going back to the NIHR, one of your roles there was around making it easier for commercial enterprise to get trials done. Why does that matter? Why does it matter that it's easy or easier for private enterprise to run trials?
Well, it's hugely important to make sure that from a business and a commercial point of view, they can capitalize on the amount of time they have for their IP, that they minimize the time that that it takes to evaluate that product, and they have maximum time to commercialize. I mean, that's just from
because otherwise, if that didn't exist, then they wouldn't invent the thing in the first place.
Totally, yes. And the other reason is that we're not a single island, the UK. We're part of a globe, a global community, and a business isn't tied to coming to the UK to do their research. They can go anywhere. So there is an element of the UK being competitive.
Right.
It's hugely important that we do our utmost not to compromise, safety and the standards of evaluation, but we also try and make it quicker. It's got to be about efficiency and productivity as well. So it was really exciting for me to then help to bring some of that industry sort of demand, I guess, or need to the NIHR at that point in time, because it helped to bring different perspectives and challenge the status quo.
And what were some of if you hadn't done that, or if there hadn't have been that mentality there, whether you introduced it or you sort of accelerated it, what do you think is the risk, if companies aren't necessarily able to find a highly productive, highly professional, highly safe way in the UK to bring their products through to market?
Well, the risk of not having that environment is that the UK ends up getting less research ultimately. I mean, we know that NIHR and other players are working very hard to make sure that we're still leading. And the fantastic thing is that there's a huge capability. There's a huge expertise in terms of the institutions we have that's able to provide the the expertise that's needed to enable this research to go on. But very simply, there is a cycle time issue in some of this as well. So it all needs to work together.
Yeah, I mean, we know from our side, there's a noticeable difference in the resources and signposting and sort of productivity that's available within the UK infrastructure. And for example, when you look at the FDA and the US infrastructure, it's so far seems to be a lot clearer in the UK, and a lot easier to find organizations like the NIHR. So for us, they actually helped us quite significantly in crafting what our trial protocol would be. Whereas I think in the US, it's more sort of, you send it in and you hope, and then you might get some feedback or it might not, or, it's a bit of a black box, and the online resources, and there isn't really that much there. And it's very much left up to you to try and figure something out. And then you post it off, and what you get back might not be what you expect, sort of thing.
Well, it's great to hear that experience actually, because you know, I think a few years ago I probably wouldn't have heard you say that. So
No, we were really impressed with the NIHR. We really were.
that's brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. So when and how did you hear about MedCity?
Well, I was working at CW Plus actually,
Yeah.
and so that was probably my last.
Which is like
my,
CW Plus is kind of like the innovation hub of the Chelsea and Westminster.
Indeed, actually, yeah. So I left industry largely to continue that experience that I had with the NIHR, to try and see if I could, you know, make change happen elsewhere or be involved in other parts of innovation development. And CW Plus is where I heard about MedCity, and CW Plus was fantastic learning for me, because it was the first time I actually came face to face with clinicians wanting to innovate in digital technology.
Right.
And the charity were developing this program to promote innovation coming from within, which was brilliant. And I mean, there were two experiences there, or two examples that were amazing for me. One was working with an anaesthetist who was using gamification to pre-op to distract children so that they could be anesthetized. And I just remember working with the anaesthetist. I had no time whatsoever, and so I had to go in and snatch 15 minutes in a cubicle just to understand, well, what are you trying to do here, and etc. And actually, the main problem is clinician time, obviously, and the other problem was scaling up. And I'm sure you understand the pressures of scaling up. So you can develop a technology for the place it's going to be used, but then, you know, how do you actually then get it widely adopted?
Well, especially if the clinician is some kind of if a working clinician is in a senior role in that organization, that then becomes a real time crunch. So I think it's, from what I've seen, and this has come from working particularly with a lot of the cohort on the digital accelerator, and also some of the companies that MedCity supports, you can see that a lot of them have started with a clinician founder and then used that platform to build up a kind of organization around them that can then take that and scale that up. Because, you know, for a clinician, if they want to continue being a clinician, it seems to me to be quite a struggle to then expect them to run and scale a sort of private enterprise. But that's, I don't know what you think.
I agree with you, although you know, I've seen some success stories for sure, where, you know, some people are running clinics at the same time, and to be honest,
it's amazing.
Yeah, and you'll know, I mean, one of the key components of having a good innovation is by having early clinical input. So I mean, what's not to like if you're a clinician to start with, right? So you know the problem.
I have been quite jealous sometimes of clinicians and sort of companies, because it's like, you know, a lot of companies, if they haven't got that internally, then, you know, you go through this big process of finding clinical input and clinical people to work with, whereas, you know, some of the other people, they have it in-house, they are clinicians.
Absolutely. I mean, how did you get your clinical input, just as we're talking
so about? Early on, we recognized that it was critical to us, and we've been lucky enough to have a number of investors who have backgrounds in either health tech or healthcare, particularly in primary care. So through our investor network, we've been connected to a number of sort of key clinicians who have taken an interest in what we're doing. I think that was the big thing for us. It might be consistent across other health tech companies, is that there are just so many clinicians and they all do very different things, and they all have, A, they're very busy, and B, they have often a very specific sort of discrete interest set. So you need to find, or we had to find kind of champions of what we were doing, and that had that belief in us, and they've been working with us for a while now. But we're looking for more, and actually talking about sort of bringing a full-time clinical director on at the moment. So yeah, watch this space. But no, it's definitely something that we identified early on, partly because if you're looking to work with the NHS, which we are, you need to make sure that you are aligned with the needs at the level and the area that you want to operate at as early as possible, because probably where you think you are is probably not exactly where you're going to end up. And so the sooner that you find that out and you can begin that journey, the better, as opposed to, spending 2 or 3 years developing something only to find out that, what you've done just isn't a fit.
Yeah. That is not a good place to be. But
No.
so you asked how I joined MedCity.
Yeah, so MedCity, how did you hear about, you're at CW Plus,
Yes,
which is in Westminster, so then what happened?
So I actually, it was because of my research background, and MedCity was forming at that time. The whole premise of MedCity is making London and the UK world leaders in life sciences for the growth of the economy and for the benefit of patients, and clinical research, clinical trials, hugely important for that. How can we make sure that we grow research capability? And so I was asked actually to be a sort of advisor and an expert in this area, working with companies to help them find what they were looking for in terms of research. Obviously, I had the connections with NIHR, I knew about the NHS, I knew about industry. So that was my start with MedCity.
Was there anything like MedCity around when it started? I know it didn't start that long ago. It was like 7 or 8 years ago, maybe somewhere around that. But it feels like when you explain it like that, and what I know about it, it's still an unbelievably innovative organization with an incredible mission. So I'm sort of like, well, wasn't that quite, there must have been quite a lot of foresight displayed by the people that set that up, 8 years ago, right?
I mean, that's really insightful comment, actually. Was there anything else? Not that I know about, actually. And I mean, that there were we're classed as a cluster organization, and I think that there were places like Boston, for example, very well developed life sciences sector. And
Cambridge is another area.
Yes, indeed. So the founders, actually, who are the London Academic Health Science Centres, and I can explain who they are, as well as the Greater London Authority, did have the foresight really to say, well, together, Imperial, King's and UCL are pretty good as institutions.
People have heard of them.
That's right. They're usually in the top 10 of world-leading universities. The academic health science centres were set up to translate the science from universities into the NHS and healthcare practice. And if we sort of clubbed together, then we would be even better than we would be individually. And then, we do have the potential to be a global leader. So that was the sort of premise of it. And actually, what an exciting then opportunity
incredible
to be there. And we're not the only cluster organisation in the UK. So there is the Northern Health Science Alliance that works with the academic universities, or the universities in the north. There's Northern Ireland and Hirani. There's Wales in Wales and Scotland. So cluster organisations have started to develop with the same premise, and actually moving forward, fast forward. It's of great value for us now to work closer together because, again, we're about the UK. It's not necessarily about a region, and that's why it's very, it's very important to do that.
And also, it's kind of, I mean, we definitely come across this where, I don't know, there might be lots of people that don't know, but there are these things called academic health science networks in the UK, which is a sort of an offshoot. They're sort of designed to sit between the NHS and private enterprise to help innovation enter the NHS in a more sort of systematic, productive manner from outside the NHS. And they're all sort of divided up, and it's all done regionally and things like that. And the great thing about health tech is that if you invent something that's good in one region, kind of by definition, there's a very high likelihood that it might be good in other regions as well. So it's interesting that you say, actually, it's sort of, although there is this regional element to it, we're all really pulling in the same direction. And actually something that works in one place is highly likely to work in another.
Yeah, it should be, but we know it does. It sounds sort of easier on paper than it probably works in practice.
That's true.
And in some respects, that's why we do work with, AHSNs and HSCs, because we're sort of very much on the ground. We're practical, we're small, we're quite agile. We pick things up very quickly and are able to then, we're important players to then share some of that insight up as well as convene players on the ground. So where we think there's a common theme that we're picking up, let's work together to address it. And because we're objective, we're neutral, we don't have an agenda in that sense, it's much easier for us to do that.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And so what are MedCity focused on at the moment? What are your big areas?
So there are three key things, and a lot of them are born out of the strengths of the region itself. So as I mentioned, one of our key elements is to drive inward investment, to drive growth of the sector and drive internationals to come and establish. And they'll only do that if they know that there's strength in capability. So those three areas are advanced therapies. London, at least last year, were second in the world in terms of advanced therapies clinical trials, which is, very, very impressive. The second is diagnostics, and that's your world.
Close to my heart.
Indeed. And obviously, we've seen the importance of that last year. And I can tell you a little bit about why we've chosen diagnostics as being one area. And the third, again, close to you, is digital data and AI. And we've seen, obviously, so many technologies now emerging with AI as being the core, the need to access data, digital, and being part of Digital Health London obviously helps that core. So those are the three focuses.
So where do you want to start? Because I want to kind of give a bit of an overview about what you're doing in each one, and I know you've got some kind of some things to mention in each one. So where would you like to start across all of those?
Well, we can start in advanced therapies if you like.
Please. Advanced therapies.
So as I mentioned, really a lot of our involvement in advanced therapies have come from the research that's been happening within the universities about novel treatments, gene therapies that can revolutionize, patient lives and cure people.
Right.
And there are a few things really to mention. It's a niche area. It's very expert, and what we found was that the value of growing this is largely about creating a community. It's not largely, but one of the important things is creating community and the ability to enable companies to interact with researchers for collaboration. So
is it because of this area, advanced therapies, gene therapy is so high tech, if you like, and cutting edge? A lot of it is still within universities.
Yeah, so it is, but also then there's been a lot of investment from the government to develop advanced therapy treatment centres, for example. So we are seeing these treatments come now into practice, into the community, which is being transformational, but still, it's not always the sort of primary pathway, and so there is a journey. There's still a journey to follow. And so we created with the network of universities and London Advanced Therapies a community to allow innovators and companies to network with the NHS and academia. And it's this community sort of spirit that helps the shared learning, best practice, and bring about bigger things. And the other thing that we've done also within that program is a collaboration program that match makes companies with researchers. So projects are then yield some really positive outcomes, which then go back to what you're saying, speeding up that R&D pathway. So that's been successful. I think, as I said, we've seen trials grow. That's not just down to us. It's a whole ecosystem effort.
Has there been are there any specific diseases that have been worked on more than others, or anything that springs to mind?
Nothing that springs to mind. There is much of this work is going on around the institutions in London. So Great Ormond Street working on paediatric, Moorfields working on eye. So there are pockets of this already happening. Absolutely.
Because I know that we had Daniel Rook on over Christmas, and he's the co-founder of something called Start Codon, which is an accelerator out of Cambridge, and a huge number of their cohort are focused on gene editing therapies within the cancer space. So it's hugely exciting.
Yeah, I mean, big area actually, immuno-oncology and the cancer area for sure. And actually there's a lot of interest from the Asian market to come and collaborate in that area as well.
Okay.
The expertise in London. So
and are you almost in the role of honest broker in that situation, because of your reputation and because of your position? You're able to connect inbound interest, inbound investment in a nice, honest way with where it's best suited to go.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, I mean, the team are brilliant, really. We have a huge range of expertise that allows us to almost, sift out what genuinely would be a match for the interests and the capability and capacity of the region. So it just aids a more efficient sort of process, if you like.
Yeah, for sure. Because I can imagine that, universities or having someone that's able to triage that effectively with subject knowledge, with context, actually would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So diagnostics, shall
Diagnostics.
I touch on that? So
yeah.
Diagnostics has been an interesting area.
It's kind of come into the limelight since March last year in a big way.
Indeed. So we sort of came across that through work that we did with universities on the Testing Alliance. So this was actually, which is an interesting scenario. So at the time, obviously, there was a huge need for increasing testing capacity, PCR testing.
Yeah.
And the universities, the London universities, were very keen to help and pivot their capabilities to support that. As it happened, we stepped in to say, well, one university can provide X amount of tests, but 4 universities can provide 20,000 tests a day.
Right.
Let's go for that.
Okay.
And so
so wait just a second. So when COVID sort of started to kick off, I guess when did it hit your radar? Feb, or were you guys a bit earlier and a bit ahead of the curve?
So the universities themselves were obviously, I mean, Imperial was already in the news doing epi stuff and doing the disease modeling and things like that. So there was a lot of research sort of picking it up. In terms of the testing itself, I mean, that was from sort of March onwards, really, when we had the Lighthouse Labs, and then we realised, everybody realised actually we needed to ramp up testing, and that's when institutions started to become involved. And so the Testing Alliance really then is a partnership of 4 universities, having now the infrastructure to do PCR testing at scale. And this has been interesting because you've got fantastic clinical academic expertise doing this, because they come from brilliant universities. And therefore, fast forward, what we've built really is a capability for diagnostics, evaluation, and implementation, so to speak. So taking that forward, we've now developed or are developing what we're calling a diagnostics growth hub. So during that period, we also heard from companies who were really keen to obviously help with the pandemic, but not only help, there were companies doing other things like early cancer diagnosis, cardiovascular, which are obviously also really important. But I think it's, as you say before, navigation to understanding where to put their offer was quite hard. Some of them needed sort of tissue samples and all sorts of things. So we heard about all of these and we thought, well, okay, there must be a way to support them. And so we saw the need to actually join up some of that infrastructure.
And I think that, I mean, you and I have spoken about this diagnostics hub before, PocDoc. We're very happy that we're part of it. It's very exciting for us. And we're big supporters of it, partly because, outside of the standard CE marking process, which is relatively well laid out, which is, you have to do X and Y. And then after you do that, you get your dossier and you submit your dossier and then you get your stamp and so on. Outside of that, there isn't really a clear pathway as to how you might bring a diagnostic test effectively to market. Now, once you have a CE mark, you can legally sell it, but that's a long way away from actually having a real validated, clear route to market. Not just direct to consumer, but particularly within any kind of healthcare organization, whether that's private or NHS. And so what I'm really excited about, what the MedCity Diagnostic Hub is going to do is to actually help and support diagnostic manufacturers in doing that. So whether it's building up external evidence, whether it's, because it's not just clinical accuracy that's an issue with diagnostics, usability is a massive issue. So, I'm sure you've noticed with the rapid tests, if you take the sample wrongly, that has a huge impact on accuracy, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then sort of we put together what you've just said with then our capability of finding investment, finding infrastructure, linking with manufacturing and linking with AHSNs and the NHS. And you've got a pretty neat pathway, actually. Yeah. So anyway, this is sort of work in progress. So maybe another time, we can come back and tell our story.
Well, yeah, we can do a show about us having been the guinea pig. It's all good.
Yeah, for sure.
That's fine.
And I mean, from a personal point of view, Steve, though, diagnostics is really important for me because I'm part of a family that was diagnosed with a genetic disorder that predisposed us, or at least 3 out of the 5 of us, with bowel cancer. And it was only through genetic screening that I found out that I was one of the 3 that were affected in my family, and was able then to have elective surgery.
Right.
Unfortunately, my other 2 sisters, it was too late for them, and they actually did get bowel cancer. Luckily, they're both fine.
Right.
So it's hugely important for me from that point of view. And also, I mean, from a technology point of view, I mean, we still have to go through surveillance and screening. So to have now, in fact, a company that we've been supporting early on, to have a technology that actually takes away the need to go and have a flexible sigmoidoscopy in hospital, because you can actually have it in primary care, perhaps.
Right.
I mean, that's
huge.
Yeah, that's a bit like the Disney experience, right?
Well, yeah. And so are you able to tell who that company is, or is it still under wraps?
The company is Surgees, actually, and they've just recently started doing some work with St Mark's Hospital, which is actually the hospital that I work with. So, kudos to them; they've been fantastic. So yeah, it's good.
I think that I mean, we've talked about this before, where even before the pandemic, but particularly now after the pandemic, there is a growing need for point of care solutions that will allow either somebody to test themselves or be tested in a out of clinic location, or if it's in clinic, in an extremely quick, easy way. So, if I take cardiovascular disease as an example, one of the things that PocDoc wants to do is to reduce what's normally a 2 or 3 appointment lipid screen follow-up test process assessment into a one-stop 15-minute appointment that potentially even when we secure regulatory approval for self-test, that will allow someone to do it at home themselves. And so I think that the need for those solutions is really important now, and more important than ever, and particularly that anything that is in the early detection, early diagnosis stage is really connected to prevention. And now there's been lots and lots of talk over the last 5-10 years that the NHS needs to dedicate more resources to prevention. And so I think that wherever organizations like yours or any of the others can actually help develop preventative solutions that actually provide a better patient experience. For example, yours with the bowel cancer testing piece, that's just a better experience. Just like, however which way you look at it. So anything like that, I think is hugely exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it is challenging though, isn't it? On how to introduce technology to then disrupt an existing pathway.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you've been able to sort of cross that one.
Well, I think it's well, first of all, it goes back to what we were saying before, is that you have to have a pretty deep understanding of what the current pathway is to begin with, which in the NHS is not particularly obvious. You have to find partners and support, and that's why we've made a big point of reaching out and trying to get involved in as many things as we can do. And then I think that that after that, it's a question of trying to adapt what your technology can do to the existing pathway. I think is probably the easiest way to go. You know, there are some people that have been able to completely reinvent the wheel, but that's a very hard path, and it's a bit of a, you know, it's a bit of a lottery. You know, I think it's probably easier to try and integrate what you're doing into the overall structure. And the key things that have helped us have really been trying to focus on, well, how does this improve efficiency? How does this reduce cost? And how does this improve patient experience? So if you improve patient experience, you're likely to increase compliance, which we talked about at the beginning of the show, and decrease do not attend. Both of those things help, again, reduce cost. So it sounds a bit sort of, you know, pounds and pence, but ultimately, if you can relate it back to that, then great. And I think, for example, a colonoscopy, for example, is not a particularly pleasant experience, having had one myself, you know, and so that I could see that requirements around that would have a relatively low compliance rate. But actually, if there is a much simpler, much more pleasant experience that someone can do, then that would increase compliance. And also the costs associated with someone contracting bowel cancer are enormous, let alone the human factors involved. So it kind of makes economic sense as well. But no, it's certainly not an easy pathway to follow. And I think also when you're dealing with primary care, so GPs and things like that, recognizing that each GP surgery is basically a business in and of itself, even though it's rolled up into larger organizations, that's also another factor.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy to navigate. And anyway, let's watch this space as to what's going to be happening with the NHS in due
Yeah, I mean, so on that, I mean, I mean, some of the clinicians that we work with have said that they've seen more change in the last 12 months than they have in, you know, the last 10 years. What's your view about what changes will remain and what may sort of disappear again? What do you think in terms of health tech or changes to the healthcare systems here to stay?
Well, I certainly think, you know, wider accessibility in terms of telemedicine and virtual consultations and all of those things are here to stay. And
Yeah.
in some respects, it's a matter of, you know, it can be a matter of choice. I mean, my husband for the first time signed up for a virtual GP. And
oh yeah, good on him.
Unfortunately, it was cut off the first time.
Oh, no.
Try again.
Oh, no.
But you know, I mean, if it can change him, it can change anybody, I could say.
Right.
So I think those things will stay. I think people have cottoned on to the convenience of certain things, but and you know, so online delivery for prescriptions and all those sorts of things. I mean, they were starting anyway. They've gone through the roof now.
Yeah.
But there is an element of face-to-face that I think still needs to exist. And, you know, sadly, mental health services and all of those, I think have just been, you know, quite hardly hit. And I think the sooner we can go back to some form of face-to-face for that type of area, the better.
I would agree. I know there's services like Kooth, who we've also had on the show, and a number of others that deliver it digitally. But yeah, I would agree. There's definitely an element where a human face-to-face contact in that context would probably be helpful. So what do you think from a government perspective that the government could be doing or should be doing to keep the pace of health tech development, to keep it going?
So I think the recent investments being done in that area needs to carry on. So you know, I know that there is a move to continue the funding into medtech and digital, which is, you know, very welcome. The work that NHSEx has done with the other agencies around simplifying regulation and standards. For medtech,
particularly for digital. So NHSEx basically is for everyone listening, is sort of the NHS kind of realized that they needed a dedicated arm for digital health services, and that's what NHSEx is.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think the other thing is also around ensuring access, and we've talked about market access a few times. And I think one of your previous guests talked about, you know, Kate, I think, you know, navigation and the challenges with navigation to get market access. So simplifying that, which is what the Accelerated Access Collaborative is trying to do. alongside NICE and MHRA and Health Research Authority and others is definitely the right thing to do. And I think that all of that will contribute to keeping what has been good around the pandemic and the take up of technology, as well as continuing to the encouragement to collaborate, because actually that's one thing that definitely shouldn't diminish. And we've seen lots of technology that has arisen through some really interesting partnerships that you wouldn't have ordinarily seen at pace anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that what's been clear to me over the last 12 months, certainly from us and as well, having experienced this firsthand, is that the pace of development seems to have just gone through the roof. Now, I know that's because we've all been, focused on solving very specific problems, but it would be great to see that sort of continue, and certainly continue as sort of a jewel in the crown of British tech would be great, I think.
Absolutely.
So I know that MedCity, you've mentioned it a few times. You've also got, and you've spent quite a lot of time dealing with something which is often, I think, pushed to the side and not necessarily considered so much, which is private investment, raising private investment. And I think that that's obviously, as an entrepreneur, I think that, I mean, every day we live with how important that is. And so I think, but what I find is interesting is that you've actually got and made that a major part of your offering, which is the Angels in MedCity, which is one of the most prestigious angel networks in the country in terms of raising early stage investments. So was that always part of the plan, or did that kind of come on at some point?
So when we thought about what we needed to do as an organization, I've been talking a little bit about community, but to grow the sector, it's not just about translational science and getting science into the NHS innovation. It's all about, it's also about encouraging entrepreneurialism and the growth of business. So, a couple of key market failures in this, or where companies struggle, is investment. The other is finding the right research expertise, but we've talked about that. And so investment was a key factor for us when we set up. And it was really early stage investment that we found when we'd done some research, which is where people struggle the most. And the investors that are likely to invest in early stage companies are angel investors.
Well, yeah, by definition.
So we, with the help of partners, created Angels, the Angels in MedCity, or MedCity Angels as you saw it, and for two key aims really. One is to give opportunities, or early stage companies opportunities to pitch. Some of these companies may not have ever gone in front of an investor, so we gave them pitch training. We looked at their slides. We've actually got a steering committee that does due diligence on companies, so we make sure that they're at the right stage. And
it's not easy to get on this thing. I can tell you from experience, it's not easy to get on it. There's a lot of due diligence that goes on, and only 6 companies at each event get to actually talk to the investors. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, and it's varied, but roughly so. So we've tended to have sort of 2 to 3 pitch events. Actually, this year we'll have 3 to 4 probably. And the other major objective is to give some education to investors themselves, because angel investors may not be necessarily up to speed with what's trending, what's new innovation, the value of investing in life sciences, which may not be short term.
But and I also think that your role, again, you're playing the role of honest broker. So certainly some of our early stage investors, one of our advisors is a guy called Peter Cowley, who's one of the most experienced and prolific angel investors in the UK. He gets literally thousands of pitch decks a year. And so having an honest broker in there to actually say, well, hold up a second, we've actually done some due diligence on these companies, and these, we believe, are the 6 or 7 companies that actually are worth you looking at and looking in real detail, not just skipping through and then dismissing because we actually think there's something in this. I think that's hugely valuable if I was an investor.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's been a pretty successful program. Companies have raised, a significant amount of money that has then helped them to raise additional sums. So, you need that credibility of getting something before you can then go on to, attract more investment for sure.
Yeah, I think in health tech particularly, there's this concept of the valley of death, which is sort of between where you've proven feasibility, but there's still a huge amount of development required to get to market, which doesn't really exist within other areas of tech. Within other areas of tech, you can move from feasibility to launch in a really, really short period of time, weeks or months potentially, which isn't really quite the same in health tech, particularly not with some of the things that you deal with, advanced therapies. I mean, some of that stuff is like years in the development, but when it comes out, it may literally change the lives of millions and millions of people.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Cool. So what impact do you think it may or may not have? I know I'm just going to throw this in right at the end, but this might be more of a long conversation, but have you seen any impact so far? Do you feel like it is, or do you feel like the UK has done enough to sort of, carry on its own?
I missed the impact.
I was saying, what kind of impact do you think Brexit might have with us leaving the EU and in this area of health tech, health development research?
Oh gosh, that is a big one.
We've only got like a couple of minutes, and Johan's going to cut us off.
So I think it's a really important question actually, and I think it to me, what we've just talked about in the sorts of things that we're doing in supporting research to happen quickly, to review regulation, to enable test beds for innovative technology to be piloted and evaluated within clinical systems, and to have connected health records. I mean, they're all fantastic ingredients for us to be very competitive post Brexit. So I can't say that I can't say that we're into it yet, because some of these things are in development, but I definitely see the promise of us doing very well. Absolutely.
Right. So we're in good stead. Well, look, on that note, we've come to the end of the show. So Neelam, thank you very much for coming on. Neelam Patel, CEO of MedCity. And thank you very much to everyone for listening, and keep an eye on the socials for next week's guest. But yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.